Hello friends, it's Seb again. There's still a bit more time left in the year and I'm hoping to get some more books under my belt. So probably at the beginning of next year I'll be able to do my best books of the year as per usual. But for now, in the meantime, I thought I would do the most surprising books that I read. Some good surprises, some not some good surprises, and some just kind of weird surprises. Or at least one of them was anyways. But we'll start with what was easily the most disappointing book of the year for me, which was The Performance by Claire Thomas. I might get some of the names wrong here, but if I do, then it'll be in the description. But yeah, so this book was so disappointing only because the premise was so good, and I did kind of wonder, because I like the premise so much, if maybe it would be one of those books that for me, like the premise is much better than what the actual book is. You know what I mean? Like it sort of oversells itself in a way. But I was just not prepared for the huge disparity here. So the premise is that it's there's a showing of Happy Days by Samuel Beckett in Australia, and meanwhile the bushfires are raging outside. So the play is about like a woman who's like up to her waist in sand, and then in the second act up to her neck in sand, and she's just kind of like doing her life and living, and obviously slowly being covered by sand. And the idea of watching a piece of art like that while outside the theater the world is like kind of actually burning because of the climate catastrophe, just felt like so like deliciously interesting to read about, and I was so psyched for that. And it was so boring because the women, it focuses on like three different women, and I just found them really dull 2D characters, and like the sort of the engagement, I only read half of it. I gave up. I have to say, I gave up. So maybe it got really different by the end of it. But like, it just, yeah, it didn't. I talked about this a lot somewhere else, so I'll leave a link there if you're more interested in hearing specifically why I was disappointed by it. But for now, let's move straight on to another disappointment, which was Circe by Madeline Miller. The reason this disappointment was actually a surprise was because I liked Miller's first book, Song of Achilles, quite a lot. And so I know like people have different opinions about the two different ones, and they're quite different, but like I didn't expect there to be such a big gap in my appreciation from her first book to her second book. And the reason why this one disappointed me, is something I think about a lot, and I've talked about a lot as well in a different video, which I'll probably link maybe. Yeah, like I was thinking about this just yesterday actually, and it gave me a bit more respect in a way for what Madeline Miller does, because I realized that she has these two main books, Song of Achilles and Circe, out so far. And Song of Achilles is kind of writing back to the Iliad, and Circe is kind of writing back to the Odyssey, and the Iliad and the Odyssey are the two kind of foundational texts of Greek myth that we have, like the two works by Homer that are like the two epic poems, I should say, by Homer that we have. So like to take these two kind of cornerstones of Greek mythology and then have your own two novels, and that each kind of respond in different ways, is actually really cool. And it makes me really wonder what her third book is going to be like what's she going to write back to next time. But anyway, yeah, like in the Iliad, the reason I like Song of Achilles so much is because like I felt like the way that she responds to, the Iliad is about this guy Achilles who's a soldier, and it's about his anger and his rage and like the different kind of consequences of it, and the way he overcomes it or doesn't, and that's the kind of the theme of the Iliad. And in Song of Achilles, the main character is this guy called Patroclus, who is the lover of Achilles, and she's sort of like countering Achilles' rage with Patroclus's care, and like offering a different kind of heroism and a different kind of masculinity. And then we have the Odyssey, which is about a man who's going on all these adventures around the world trying to get home, compared with Circe, which is about a woman who is stuck on an island and having to reconcile herself to the fact that she will never get home, and like this island is kind of her home, and like kind of not moving around. Although I would say Circe does have a lot of geographical scope like the Odyssey, and like kind of she goes into different myths around the Mediterranean Greek world, and it also like kind of draws out some of the main themes which are already in the Odyssey, like mortals caring for each other rather than the gods who are like always being aggressive against them, and care, not care, but home versus war, right? Like he's escaping the Trojan War to try and get home, and like kind of what home means, versus like kind of the warring worlds of men and of gods. So as in terms of projects, these are both like kind of interesting, but it was like how she did each project, she being Madeline Miller, you know what I mean? Like I didn't like Circe's character, how she begins and what she becomes. I didn't like her arc. Everything about like the way that these themes were tackled just like kind of rubbed me up the wrong way. I think the only character that I found kind of interesting was Odysseus, which is sort of ironic because, you know, he's not the main character in Circe, but just like what Madeline Miller does with him, especially as a continuation of who he is in Song of Achilles, because it's like a sequel. It is, I thought it was quite interesting, but he's not the main deal. So and the idea that the man would be the more interesting character in a very like feminist work, although is it feminist really? So yeah, because of that fundamental disconnect, like for example in Song of Achilles, I forgave a lot of bad writing, things that like little plot things or like sentence by sentence things which bothered me, didn't bother me too much because I was just sold on the whole book in general. Whereas with Circe, all those little things which were still there bothered me so much more. For example, in Song of Achilles, I did a video where I talked about like things that bothered me in writing, and one of them was like a thing that Madeline Miller does in Song of Achilles to characterize Patroclus. She has this like sentence pattern where he says something and then he negates it with a short sentence at the end, like he should have been there, he was not. And that's like not wrong in itself, it's just that she repeats it over and over. I just thought it felt really unnatural and repetitive, and I think it was supposed to be a kind of characterization, but I kind of forgave it. But in Circe, she has her own little thing where she sometimes speaks like Yoda, like down into the sea I went, wonder I must. It's this stuff with, you know, putting a verb at the end is like, I don't know, like just starts to feel really unnatural, especially when none of the other characters talk like that. And it kind of just cemented the idea that like it wasn't a Song of Achilles issue that I had, it's a Madeline Miller issue that I have where she uses like little sentence quirks instead of character, you know what I mean? Or she uses quirks like that in the writing to try and create character or in place of character. Let's move on. Next there's Luster by Raven Leilani, which I talked about recently. Another potential link there. And this is about Edie, a young black millennial living a precarious life who gets involved with an older white man, and sort of like how her life gets more and more entangled with his privileged middle class suburban family. So this one, I guess, like I didn't buy into the hype, but like I thought I would like it a lot more because like a lot of people that I follow on BookTube really liked it, and I liked some parts of it. Like it feels sort of important in a way as a record of a certain time, which happens to be now, and a certain lived experience, which is, you know, very specific to America. I think it was yesterday as well, I saw this graffiti. Yeah, it was yesterday. I saw some graffiti which I liked, which said something like the powerful write history, the powerless write songs, or the powerless write our songs, and the powerful write our history, or something like that. Anyways, and I really like that, and this book kind of I felt fits that in that it was trying to be sort of the song, but also a bit of a historical record of this experience, you know, which is in many ways not visible. It's trying to make something visible, which is important for people now, and so that it is remembered. So in that sense, I feel like it's got like kind of a lot of value to it. But I just didn't enjoy reading it. You know, I just didn't really get any pleasure out of it. It actually reminded me weirdly of this thriller that I read a while back. I do not remember the name, and I will put it in the description. But this thriller was about a older white woman who her husband starts having an affair with a millennial who like works as a barista somewhere, and she basically hires someone to murder the millennial. And it's like it's funny, you know, because she's all the things she hates about it, like why is she always using Instagram so much, that bitch. It's like just so ridiculous and over the top that like you can kind of laugh and like, you know, like get into the drama of it. So juicy and bitchy, and the two women have this they don't interact with each other that much, but clearly the writer wanted also to show this generational divide, but do it in a very like, I don't know, over the top way, which was very poorly written, but really fun. And like, I really enjoyed a lot of that, even though like it's not good writing. Whereas, you know, obviously Luster has in lots of ways, is technically skillful and like powerful in lots of ways, but I didn't have any fun with it. Whereas like I would rather read the sort of the cheap thriller, which is, you know, really trashy actually in lots of different ways, and like kind of not sensitive to a lot of different things, but hits on some raw kind of truths, and like kind of in a way I feel like is better at engaging with these things like generational conflict and so on, by doing them in this like absurd and almost grotesque kind of way. I feel like also this is just like a sensibility thing. Like I think I've always known, but I feel like I've been noticing more that things like that are absurd and grotesque, like grotesque, not like gross, but grotesque, like in the old, like, you know, like really exaggerated and like and pushed to a sort of extreme limit, which makes things look kind of silly and almost maybe a bit satirical. Yeah, that kind of thing. I like that a lot. But yeah, sometimes I think like the raw silliness and like and like kind of campy violence of a cheap thriller can be more effective. In this case, it was more effective at engaging with that suspicion between older and younger generations in America today, than something which is obviously as polished and as serious, I think, as Luster. Because honestly, at the end of the day, like Luster just kind of bored me. Next up, Tama by Mieko Kanai. This one was the weirdest of the surprises because Mieko Kanai is a writer who I really love and admire, and this book is one of her later books. It was written in the 90s, I think, or 80s maybe, I don't know. But yeah, like I'd heard that it's very different from her earlier stuff. Her earlier stuff is kind of philosophical, kind of crazy, kind of mind-bending, a bit surreal in places, a bit like kind of raw and violent, and I love it. Whereas this is like a bunch of losers hanging out in Tokyo and taking care of a cat, and it's kind of like a bit more mundane, a bit more domestic. And I read reviews which didn't say it's bad, but like it just they say it's way more like tame or like a normal book in a way compared to her earlier stuff. So I was kind of thinking either it'll be just as good and amazing and fantastic as everything I've read by her, or it'll be kind of like a kind of a step down and more chill, but also rewarding in its own way, or it will be something like quite like really disappointing actually, because she's one of my favorite writers. You know, I feel like, oh no, like what's this? You know, it could be very disappointing. So it's kind of like thinking it's got to be one of these three things. And the surprise was it was all of them. Like I was totally, there were things in it that I really loved and like that like felt like, yes, that is Mieko Kanai. That is her writing style. Like even on like the second page, I was like, there she is doing that thing that's incredible, that like she writes like no one else I know. So there was that kind of familiarity. But then there were bits that were kind of disappointing and boring. And I was like kind of, well, actually, like, does this need to be a book? And there's so many references to like stuff that I didn't understand. Which was like, you know, art references and movie references and book references, and you don't need to understand them, but I just take it kind of alienates sometimes. By the way, that was a problem I had with Luster as well, like the kind of all the references to American stuff, which I you know, like I feel like American culture is so like everywhere, but like there were so many things I didn't know what she was talking about in that book, and the characters like talk about them in a way where it's like, you know what I'm saying, right? And that's like just annoying if you don't, not annoying, but alienating if you don't know what they're saying. Anyway, that was here too. But yeah, as well as the disappointing stuff, there was stuff that felt like a kind of Mieko Kanai that I haven't read before that really surprised me and was rewarding, because it was like, oh, I didn't know she wrote stuff like this. And it's like we're kind of being subtly asked, I think, like to look at these characters and, you know, say, are their lives, you know, like what are the values of their lives? What's the value of their life? Because the main character is very disappointed in like a lot of things to do with his life, and in many ways feels like a failure. And so like, you know, I feel like it's kind of one of the questions of the book which isn't directly asked, but it's like we're meant to think like, is he a failure, or is he actually providing something really important to the world and the people around him? And yeah, like that kind of, these things about care and stuff like that. And you know, what is the worth of a person? Those are things that I've never encountered in her writing before, but which I thought were done really, really well here. So yeah, this was like a very odd one because like it was satisfying and disappointing and surprising, and yeah, most of all surprising, I guess, which is why it's on this list. Next we have Winterwood by Patrick McCabe. This is back in winter again, like last year, January, I guess. And yeah, there's no proper order to this list in case that wasn't obvious. But my expectation at the time was that this was going to be a sort of a creepy thriller by an Irish person set in Ireland. So like that was kind of cool. I wanted to kind of get to know more Irish books and stuff at that time. And the actuality, what surprised me is that it is those things, but it is also a sort of Irish expat horror, which has pitch black humor in it. And also like provided the sort of catharsis that I absolutely needed at that time in my life. Like it was exactly the right book to read at the right time, and I did not expect to get that from, you know, just picking up a fun creepy thriller. You know what I mean? Like, to explain this, I'll give some backstory. So since coming here, I've developed or discovered, I'm not sure which really, this that I have a kind of uncomfortable, largely uncomfortable relationship with Ireland, because it's kind of like my paternal identity. It's like it's my father. My father is Irish, so I'm half Irish, and the mix of connectedness and disconnectedness I feel from Ireland and Irish culture is largely to do with my dad's life. He left Dublin when he was pretty young. He ended up in London in the 80s. That's where I was born. So I grew up kind of like with my father's Irish immigrant identity defining my own identity in lots of ways, and it still does in lots of ways, you know, whether I like it or not. Now in Winterwood we have this character Redmond, who's a native of an old like kind of village or rural town called Slievenagia. This is like, you know, traditional Ireland, old vanishing Ireland, fiddlers and jigs. But Redmond has since become a journalist in Dublin, in like kind of, you know, like the modern city, the developed Ireland, first world country, Western liberal democracy, all this, right? And in the 80s he gets even further away from that core by going to London and starting a family in London. So there were all these references at the beginning, especially of Winterwood, to specific geographical locations and specific songs from the 80s and stuff like that, which are places that my father moved through and listened to and experienced, and that so I also have experienced through him, and I've moved through and lived in them myself. And so that was kind of uncanny to read about just by itself. But then it gets more interesting because Redmond is assigned to go back to his hometown of Slievenagia to like write something about it to show, you know, this is the old way of Ireland, the vanishing, the sort of romanticized, mystical, you know, leprechaun core of Ireland that, like, you know, the world should see before it disappears in the face of modernization. So he goes back and he meets this guy called Ned, and Ned is this larger than life like kind of grotesque parody of old Ireland, this sort of cackling fiddler character. And yeah, sure, it has the story does have a sort of standard thriller plot going through it about like abductions and stuff like that, and it's like yeah, there is that, but like the point of the book is not the plot. The point is this relationship, this uncomfortable, anxiety-inducing relationship between Redmond, who is this meek Western liberal kind of like pushover guy whose life has not really gone the way he wanted it to, and then on the other hand this raw horrifying monstrous national identity that he's just like stuck with and has to carry around with him wherever he goes. But yeah, a character being haunted by his own Irishness. Like, of course this book appealed to me. It felt like it was written for me, so it's kind of hard to recommend. But anyway, moving on, another book that surprised me in that it was cathartic in ways that I did not expect was Devil in a Coma by Mark Lanegan. And I decided to read this book as a sort of sign of respect or commemoration for somebody who died this year, the musician Mark Lanegan. And so I didn't really, you know, it kind of felt like, oh, I ought to do this, you know, like, and it'll be interesting. I didn't, you know, I wanted to see what he wrote, obviously, but I didn't expect to find something that was so good. I was actually shocked. I was really shocked because I found, you know, not just something that I could read as a sort of like, you know, way of showing respect in a way, like personally, but also I found this really rewarding reading experience about COVID and about death in general. It was also a way of writing autobiographical stuff, I think, which I hadn't ever read before and which I found so engaging that it made me want to read more memoirs. So maybe that's also a big surprise. I didn't expect reading a memoir would make me think I want to read more memoirs. So maybe it might end up changing my reading habits a bit as well. So maybe watch this space next year. There may be a few memoirs on the lists to come. Don't hold me to that though. But yeah, I talked about that a lot in my last video, so I'll leave a link there if you want to hear more about why I connected so much with Devil in a Coma. Next up, I Am China by Xiaolu Guo. I Am China is about a Scottish translator who receives a mysterious box of letters and is told to translate them. The box of letters is a correspondence. They're love letters, basically, between two Chinese people. One of them is a guy who is a rock musician, and he's fled China because of a political protest he did, and he's ended up in the British immigration, like asylum seekers nightmare system, where he's sort of like in limbo. And then the other is his lover back in China, who has stayed behind and who is sort of like struggling to find a place in China. She feels like an outsider wherever she goes within China, and even when she leaves China. And so this sort of like not feeling at home, even though she's not actually an immigrant, at least for the first part of the book. So yeah, the surprise was how could a story which has like not just the premise but also the themes which seems so interesting to me about like identity and translation and like people moving around the world and international connections and Asia and the West and all this stuff. Like how could all this not be amazing? Because I didn't find it amazing. I didn't connect with any of the characters. I connected with one. I connected with the Chinese woman. So like if you feel like, you know, 1/3 of the book is engaging, or 1/3 of the three main characters are engaging, then obviously it's not going to really work as a whole, which unfortunately was the case for me. But I talked about this somewhere else, so yeah, I'll put loads of links all over the place. Finally, we have the Penelopiad by Margaret Atwood. This is another Greek myth retelling. In this one, Penelope is dead and she's in the underworld, and she's decided to tell us her story because she's been there a long time, and why not tell her story? Also, all of her maids are dead and they're with her, and they're like a kind of a chorus. Her maids were murdered by Odysseus and Penelope's son Telemachus when Odysseus returned from his long wanderings around the world. So the chapters of the book are sort of like Penelope's more straightforward like retelling about her life, and then the maids have their own little chapters which are sort of like kind of more anarchic. They've got like a kind of working class identity, whereas Penelope is obviously a princess. And the maids chapters are also told in like kind of song and dance often, rather than like directly talking and stuff like that. It's almost like there's this sort of cabaret show going on throughout the telling of the story. So the surprise here for me was that I could read a Greek myth retelling which had this sort of like thrilling, fresh, anarchic sensibility to it, while at the same time, you know, not being just like a, you know, shooting off into the wild imaginations, like using the Greek myths as a base to do like a totally different project, but, you know, like also having this more straightforward telling of the story of Odysseus and Penelope. Sometimes almost a little bit too straightforward, I thought, but still, like that groundedness in the actual myth and like exploring the myth, while also having, you know, maids in drag doing sea shanties and stuff like that. It was like, you know, in the underworld, like while they're dead. It's like there's so much like creativity bursting off the pages, while at the same time it didn't feel like Atwood was just using Penelope as like kind of a way to tell her own story, which is what I really felt Madeline Miller did with Circe. But anyway, let's leave Circe alone for now. Although Penelope does appear in Circe, Madeline Miller's Circe, and so like there's a interesting overlap there. But yeah, the Penelopiad was really colorful, and yeah, that's it. That's the surprise. I didn't expect it to be so much fun. It's definitely one of the most fun books I've read this year, I would say. There's a few other surprises I had, but you know, it's kind of like I think I'll just like wrap this up because I've rabbited on for a long time. Just shout out though to Charlotte's Web and the employees, because Charlotte's Web by E.B. White, I went into it thinking I would like it. Instead, I left it like loving it and crying and oh my god, what just happened to me kind of feeling. That was a surprise. And the employees by Olga Ravin, I went into it thinking I would either like it or really love it, and instead I came out of it thinking, well, why didn't you do it like this, and that kind of, you know, vibe. So yeah, those were two other surprises. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I imagine this will come out around Christmas, so happy Christmas. Oh, speaking of Christmas, I can see in the background I got myself a Christmas present. So if you've watched this far, you get to see my €5. Oh, and I got a bookmark too with a little fox on it, and he's very glary fox there with a Santa hat. I don't know if you can see that, it's so bright, but yeah, that's Nostromo by Joseph Conrad, a book I've wanted to read for ages, with this gorgeous cover, and it's only €5, and I just like, it's not a book you see, kind of, I feel like, just around, like on the shelves and like reissued to look so beautiful. At least I don't see it. So when I saw it, it was like, that is a sign, that is my Christmas book to myself. So yeah, I'm pretty happy about that. Happy Christmas, and see you in the next video. Bye bye.